sense from your visit to Washington, to the White House, and what you're seeing around you?
So to your question, I think the most pressing and the highest tariff now, talking about tariffs, is uncertainty.
The highest tariff is uncertainty.
Yeah. The other tariffs we will deal with, and but uncertainty is will continue, and we have to be resilient. After my visit to Washington D.C., where I spent time in the White House, but also in the Senate with senators, also with the trade representative of the U.S., my feeling is that the challenge and the impasse between India and the U.S., I think, will be solved in the coming weeks. I think India, of course, doesn't rely on the U.S. market, and U.S. doesn't rely on India, but there is enough common interest to break that impasse. U.S. is the largest economy in the world, $30 trillion, almost 30% of the global economy. And India, of course, wants to export its products, being digital trade, also services and manufactured goods, to the U.S. in the future. And the U.S. want to also be friends with India. That's strategic for the U.S. In Asia.
So before my colleagues take over, I just want to press you on what you've just said, because it's important. You're saying the India-U.S. impasse over tariffs is likely to end sooner rather than later, is the impression you've come out with after visiting the White House. Do you want to give us some kind of a time frame that you're getting before the end of the year, by next month? When?
So it takes two to tango. So it's not only the impression I got when I was in DC that this will be like an impasse that will end, but also from the meetings I had here in Delhi. I think there's also interest in Delhi to find a path with the U.S. There is enough common interest between these two great countries to work this out. And I think it's also about the future, because there is huge potential for increased collaboration and growth. And the Americans also know that this economy, the Indian economy, is growing now, the fastest growing of the large economies of the world. But I think one number that is, for me, very staggering, and that I discussed with their economists, is that 18% of the global growth now comes from India. Just imagine what that means also for global prosperity. So you are exporting prosperity by growing so fast, because you're also demanding products from other countries.
What is the sense that, go ahead, Siddharth.
No, you first.
What's the sense that you got when you're saying that it is going to happen in coming weeks? Because particularly in terms of the penalties that India suffers importing Russian oil. In your opinion and your conversations in Washington, D.C., was it because of Russian oil imports? Because then D.C. would have also penalized China or Turkey for that matter. So is that the sense that you're getting? It's Russian oil, or is there more to it?
Or is it less to it?
Less to it.
So I will not speak on behalf of the Americans. They can speak very eloquently for themselves. My reading is that on the Russian oil, there has been a global consensus that one continued to bring in Russian oil, but it was going to be bought with a discount. So there was a ceiling of $60 US. If there is a change in that policy, then there is a change in that policy. But I think there is not a consensus on then moving 6, 7, 8 million barrels of oil out of the market every day. I think that could lead also to higher, or it would lead to higher oil prices. But you never know. There is also a lot of supply, of course. There is capacities in Saudi Arabia to increase the production quite substantially. But when I said that I also think the impasse between the US and India will end, I think there will also be an understanding on this topic. But I think this topic is manageable, and I think the other topics that we face will also be manageable. Of course, for India, the agriculture piece is important. We also know that India, over time, has to reform its agriculture sector, because you could produce the same amount of food with less resources, then it would be more profitable, and these people could then go to more profitable areas and produce higher up in the value chain. But others that are not Indians also need to understand that this is a very difficult area in Indian politics. I guess 40% of the voters have ties to the agricultural sector. So sometimes slow is fast. I know it's a Chinese saying, so I hope I'm forgiven by that in India.
Okay, you spoke about India and the US being friends, but explain to us, and I ask you this question in your capacity as a former foreign minister who understands this. So on one hand, we have President Trump saying that Narendra Modi, our prime minister, is his good friend. Yet you see this barrage of statements from various people within the Trump administration, people very close to him, who are being seen as disparaging India. And clearly this is not something that is said in diplomacy, and certainly not to friends. Is there a method to this madness that you could explain to our viewers? Because many of us and our viewers are confused. You say something one day before and next morning something else.
So I think we have to have a historic perspective on this. I think Winston Churchill once said that the farther backward you can look, the farther forward you're likely to see. You know, there has been decades now of closer cooperation between US and India. So there's been now a few weeks where there have been some hiccups, or maybe you would say more than hiccups, but I think this will pass. I don't think there is a shift in the medium long-term cooperation between India and US. I think there's too much common interests that bring them together. And look at the US, you know, the biggest American companies would not run without Indians. And the Indian diaspora is contributing very much also in the US economy. I feel that there is a lot of general affinity towards India in the US. I think the same in India. You know, until this recent hiccup, I think Trump was more popular in India in the polls than in any other country in the world, including the United States. So maybe that has now changed, but you know, I think there will be a normalization in this. And when you saw the exchanges between Prime Minister Modi and also President Trump on the Prime Minister's birthday, it couldn't be warmer. So maybe this is a warm-up to what I think will come in the coming weeks with the breakthrough.
Yeah, can I take one quick follow-up to this? A lot of people say that President Trump has failed on his core agenda of peace in Ukraine. Hasn't happened. The Hamas has not released hostages. Many other items in his agenda are still work in progress. A broader question to you. In your view, is the American century getting over?
Many interesting both premises and questions in that question. So let me then, for the sake of the argument, also say that also things are going well in the US when you look at the domestic economy. If we met a year ago, a big question would be, oh, will the US economy have a hard landing or a soft landing? And there's no landing currently. It's still growing. It's the Europeans are envious of the growth in the US. They're also very well prepared for the new technologies. They also have a lot of capital. There are small worries now related to inflation and all that, but overall the US economy is very robust. And that was the main reason why Trump was elected. It was the two I's. Inflation and immigration. And both of those things he is now dealing with. Of course, the international agenda is more complex. It's true that the outcome of the Alaska meeting is to be seen, but every war needs to end sooner or later. Also, the war in Ukraine will end, but Mr. Putin will need to feel that he has more to lose by continuing than to continue. He still, only has 18% of Ukraine. He doesn't even have Donbass, and all these areas he has said that that's part of Russia. So he might want a little bit more before he then sit down at the table. But it's a very, very sad humanitarian story. Okay. On Gaza, of course, Mr. Netanyahu, I think also surprises President Trump with some of the moves in Gaza, and especially related to the terrible humanitarian situation we're seeing there now.
So I want to come back to Gaza and steps that have been taken, including the bombing of Qatar recently by Israel, and what impact will that have on trade. But before I come to international affairs, that way I want to come back to India for a moment, and I want to ask you about some of the reforms that Prime Minister Modi has just carried out, including the GST reforms. Yeah. In your view, will these reforms help mitigate some of the challenges posed by the US tariffs? Should tariffs not go down immediately by whatever percentage that we are hoping? And will it help spur the economy further? So contributing 18% to global economy already, but contributing domestically and internationally with these GST reforms?
I think those reforms were very pertinent. I think they were very timely. So that will contribute positively to further economic growth in India. You could also say that if you look at the India-China relationship, it's not bad for the world that these two big nations also communicate well with each other. Yes. They will compete in some areas and they have border issues and all that. But overall, you can say that it's not so negative. It's rather positive. So then you can say on the other question about growth in the Indian economy, also related to the tariffs. US and India has in common that you have big home markets. Yes. So you're not so much relying on trade as others. I think trade is maybe 20% of the Indian economy. If you go to Germany, it's 50%. And I think if you go to China, it's also very, very big. It's an export-led economy. Mm-hmm. So even with the tariffs that then the US administration has now introduced, it is maybe like 2% of India's GDP is affected with it. But what I said earlier on is about the future. India is developing. Like a few years ago, you were not even manufacturing almost iPhones and mobiles. Now you're the second largest exporter in the world. And when you want to take India forward, you want to have access to the US market. So that's why you also want to break this impasse. So I'm not so worried about the short-term implications that will be dealt with, but medium, longer term, it's in both nations' interest to find a good way of trading with each other. And you know, the Americans, contrary to many others, they do consume. Yes. In many other nations, people just save the money. For example, in China, the savings rates are incredibly high, but the American consumers are still comfortable, so they buy stuff, also from India, including services and digital trade.
And is that also helping India, the services, the digital trade, especially when goods trade is facing some headwinds?
Exactly. It is just my point in the last weeks. We see that manufactured goods, the demand and the trade in manufactured goods is even contracting. Yeah. While we see services and digital is growing much higher. I don't think trade will, again, short-term, medium-term, be the engine of growth globally like it used to be. Now, trade is growing less than the global GDP. So what is driving growth now? I think are the new technologies. And these will be the drivers of growth in the years to come. And for India, it's like a very sweet spot here because you're strong on services, you are strong on digital trade, less so on manufacturing, even if you're trying to improve. So the demand now is like kind of bespoke for India, but then you need also access to the markets to grow further. You don't want to be met with 50% tariffs. You know, you want to, and that's why the EU deal is also, I guess, important for India.
But that brings me to where you started. You said that the real tariff is uncertainty.
And it's the highest tariff.
Is the highest tariff. We are in uncertain times. You still have a war in Ukraine and Russia that's gone on now for 3 years. You've had Gaza, which shows no immediate sign of ending. We just had, a few years ago, a border skirmish with China. Few months ago, we had a war with Pakistan. Are these the reasons why a number of big businesses are still reluctant to put their major investments there? It's all very well for us to sit here and say, look, India is in a sweet spot. But the truth is, a number of Indian investors, businesses are still waiting and watching. And is that because the world is such an uncertain place that you don't know what tomorrow brings? And that's the problem in this Trumpian era, particularly with America sending out these conflicting signals that we don't know if a month from now you're back with us, how the world has changed. How do you end that sense of uncertainty and what it does to business?
It's a correct observation you're coming with, and I can also show that in real numbers. But it's not only the Americans being mavericks in this situation. I think that there are other mavericks in this.
Sure, you've got
too.
Putin, you've got the Chinese. They're all.
Yeah,
and
to your list, we could also add
Netanyahu
and Iran.
Sure.
We were very close to a full-fledged war with Iran. That fortunately calmed down, and this is what we have seen that these wars have not so far in conflicts have not been of a size that they have killed the global growth. Quite the contrary, we increased the growth expectations from 2.8% globally this year to 3%, even with all those conflicts. So hopefully we can maneuver and deal with the conflicts without then also killing growth. I think that will be very important. I think also that on the overall investments in developing and emerging economies, that's a reason for concern, especially in developing economies. For the first time in decades, we saw that the foreign direct investments went down last year with 7%. There was a contraction of 7% less invested in foreign direct investments, and especially developing countries, because of the uncertainty, that really needs the investments in infrastructure, in technology, and all this, they're seeing less and less capital available. I think India is in a different space there, but there is clearly an advantage for the US in this. US, as I said, is almost 30% of the global economy, 5% of the global population, and then they're like 45% of the global military capacity, and 70% of the global market cap of all globally listed companies are in the US. So the capital is in the US. So they have so much capital. If you have a good idea, you get it financed, and there's competition among these people to finance ideas in the US. And in many developing countries and also emerging economies, I think if you have a great idea in India, you have to pay higher interest, and there may be not so many people that want to put their money there because of uncertainties. So I think is a reason to be worried about this, because we want also emerging economies to leapfrog.
Børge, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to take that forward. The World Economic Forum does surveys of CEO sentiment. You do that annually as well and the next one will be at the next chapter of the forum at Davos 2026. But I wanted to ask you, at this stage, what is global CEO sentiment looking like, especially at a time when they really don't know how to take a call? 2-3 years back, it was China plus one as far as Indian CEOs are concerned. Is this a time when Indian CEOs, particularly who will be listening to what you are saying, they have to now consider America plus one or plus two kind of scenario?
So you can look at the glass half full or half empty. I look at it half full because I'm surprised about the strength in the global economy. I did not think half a year ago that we were going to have to increase the growth expectations this year. So there is a robustness there. I think we're already seeing the productivity gains from the new technologies, especially in the US. And I think they're the drivers of growth. So those nations that are now moving forward with entrepreneurship and also startup nations and all this. And here, India has huge opportunities. It's the third largest startup nation in the world. 160,000 startups, 120 unicorns. You add one every 20 a day or something. So if you have the capital and entrepreneurship, I think you can do well. So I'm not overall pessimistic on the global economy, but of course there are also some black swans. So there could possibly be a minor bubble on AI.
Yes.
Okay.
It could also be a minor bubble on everything related to the new currencies. And fintech and all that piece. So we have to also watch out for that. And the last black swan is the global debt. We have not been so indebted since 1945. And some countries haven't been that indebted since the Napoleonic Wars. And how do we deal with that, especially if the interest rate were to go up again? And if there is a recession coming. Sooner or later there will be a recession. Recessions haven't gone, I guess. And how do you fight a recession? Spend governmental money. And if you're already so indebted that you don't have that fiscal muscle, what do we do then? Then you get an unnecessary deep recession.
Okay, Børge, firstly, thank you for busting, I'd not call it a lie, but an idea that, you know, every time a country wants to show another country down, you say, oh, that country's economy is collapsing. You're right in saying that American economy is not collapsing. A lot of people are saying American economy is collapsing because of Trump. The same question on China. Is the Chinese economy collapsing? And is this war not about India, US, or Russia, US? It's about the two super giants today, US versus China. And my second question to you would be, in the entire war that we're seeing between India and the US, is Trump pushing Modi administration towards China? Are we looking at alternatives, BRICS, SCO? Look at the conversations that are happening there.
Yeah, so on the Chinese economy, it's probably growing around 4 to 5%. But it's already a big economy. It's maybe almost 20 trillion US dollars. And if you grow 5%, it's a lot. You grow more than like a big country's economy every year. You add on top of it. So there are things working in the interest of China. They educate 12 million students every year graduate. 3.5 are engineers. They also have a huge manufacturing critical mass, and they fast in pivoting these manufacturers. So you suddenly need something else, and then they pivot towards that because they have the competence. But there are other challenges. You know, the state-owned enterprises are very big. They also need to make sure that they have also startups, entrepreneurs, and innovators. That is a good climate for that. So, but China is also leading now in many technology areas. They're already leading on everything that is related to renewables. The solar panels that you know deploy in India are from China.
Absolutely.
They could have been produced here, but you might not even have those minerals. You have them. You know, rare earth is not rare. It's all over. But no one really wants it in their neighborhood. There's open minds. And India being a democracy, you know, like if someone wants to put something in your backyard in India, it can take decades before you get it done because there's so many people involved. That's a strength, but it's also a weakness. So I would say that it's clear that also China is now taking the lead on the electrical vehicles, and they're big. EVs are big. There will be more and more EVs in the future, but there's also other nations that are there.
Geeta, by the way, was one of the first certainly in our office to get an EV vehicle. So she was ahead of her time. She was ahead of her time.
Are you able to charge it many places?
Yes, not many places. I have it at home.
Yeah.
So I don't go to other places to charge, but it is a difficult. That's an infrastructure problem that the government has to
you have
address.
this worry all the time. Oh, will I then just stop on the road?
It's called mileage anxiety.
Yeah, I can feel it.
Yes.
I can feel that too. So that's why, you know, it depends. In Norway, my home country, there's charges all over the place. But if you go a little bit south in Europe, from Geneva, where I live, you get anxious. You know, like you know that.
Where will I get the next charge?
It's difficult. But you're also right on your thesis of the G2. The G2, US, China. US, close to 30% of the global economy, China 20. That's half of the global economy in two countries. And they're fierce competitors. They're fierce competitors. They will continue to be so. Hopefully there will be no wars, you know. So, but competition can be positive, it can be negative. To your question about China and India and how this played out, I already said, it's not a bad thing that China and India now is on better speaking terms. There can be a lot of good things that China and India can do together. But if you look at it real politically, you know, you have a big panda, and you have an elephant that is also quite sizable, and they're sharing a neighborhood. China meets India, and India meets China and Myanmar, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, you know, and these nations have their interests. And India is not always thrilled about this, and maybe vice versa. So America is not a competitor in the region with India.
Yet, if I may, America is also now coming into this region once again. Should that be a cause for concern for India? And is it already a cause for concern for countries like China, for example? Yesterday, the American president was talking about getting into Afghanistan once again to take over the Bagram Air Base. American soldiers are carrying out exercises in Bangladesh. There's some operation that's already being talked about in Myanmar. So do we see more uncertainty coming into this region? And does that adversely impact, if not immediately, the markets in the long run? Point one. Point two, there's already a conflict. You've spoken about Ukraine and Israel. Tensions in Taiwan. Now, will that put economy in tailspin?
Børge, before you answer that, BRICS, SCO, the alternatives, currency swaps, is that something that you're watching very carefully and that you should be as a...
I think I was watching BRICS even more carefully a few years ago than I do today.
Good for you.
Because there are also, BRICS has grown a lot. So, you know, if you want to get something done in an organization, you also have to have common interests. And if there are too many players in the room, you get declarations that are more generic in its form. American presence, you know, as I said, America is a major military player. But it's a superpower, sometimes also without superpowers. In the sense that, you know, you use Afghanistan, they were in Afghanistan for 20 years. But now it's run by Taliban. It was run by Taliban when they started, and now it's run by Taliban again. That is a superpower. We had Vietnam, we had the Iraq War, we had the Korea War. You know, it's not easy to run other countries, even for a superpower. But I guess for India, it has its pros and cons, with also an American no abdication from the region. There's also been concerns in Korea that the Americans are pulling out. We see the Americans pulling out, partly also from Japan. We have the Filipinos that want also, at least the current president, wants an American presence there. In Europe, there are American soldiers leaving, and we still want them there. Germany has said that they're more than welcome. So it's a complex situation. I would say Trump doesn't like wars, though. Yeah. I think he is very reluctant to deploy American soldiers if it leads to an ongoing war where you see body bags coming back and it costs a lot of money. I think you can see operations like outside Venezuela when he display in a theater the power of the U.S. That's just striking. Yeah. But we're more like moving and maybe an air base in a country or something. But a permanent war with insurgents or guerrillas, I don't think he will.
But look at our concerns. But look at there's the trade war aspect. But look at our concerns from a security perspective. The United States continues to engage Pakistan and a military leadership in Pakistan. The Field Marshal was a luncheon guest at the White House soon after India's Operation Sindoor. They're meeting again at the UNGA. There's continuing defense cooperation. It comes at a time when only yesterday a pact was signed between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. So for years, India has been successful in recent times to dehyphenate India from Pakistan. For the longest time, we were hyphenated. Do you believe, from your vantage point again, that India now, for a variety of reasons, including the kind of robust economy we are, don't need to look over our shoulders anymore to what is happening in our neighborhood in Pakistan? Or should we be concerned if the Americans are seen to in some way cozy up to Islamabad, or Islamabad cozy up more likely to the White House? Should we simply focus on what we believe is a India first policy, not worry about the neighborhood at all? And we know about China's relationship with Pakistan, which has been a long-standing alliance as well. Should we feel hemmed in?
So I think every country now is looking at strengthening their own military and military resources. India is using a little bit less than 2% of its GDP on the military. I think we will see also India increasing that in the years to come. And India also has that capacity. And India will also see that it has a capacity of manufacturing military equipment. This is really high technology too. So it could possibly be something that is good for sovereignty and good for the industry. But while you could say, though, if you be very cynical, you could say that India visited Beijing and then U.S. warmed up a little bit with Islamabad. But when that deal is being made later, that I think will come, is a question of time between Modi and President Trump. I think that will go back more to what it was, and you just touched on it. Pakistan has had a very deep collaboration with China in the last years, and I do believe that you also face some Chinese missiles a few months ago, and yes. I think that's something that the Indian leadership has more put on their mind than maybe that luncheon. A luncheon is, there is.
But given these circumstances, one would have expected India and US to be closer together. Two powerful democracies working together against expansionist forces, like China. However, that didn't happen with Trump, or even now, while we're looking at a deal with America and looking at a deal with EU, often it happens it's so close and yet so far. and that's the Commerce Minister who said that about the deal with the European Union. Do you actually see that happen, or does politics at times comes into play? Why is India exercising with Russia? Why is India still buying Russian oil? We are not the biggest buyer, as you very rightly pointed out. We are not violating any sanctions, and yet this pressure on India.
So I think the U.S.-India relationship will go back more to where it was. I think this was just a few months of a hiccup. I don't see this as a structural change. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's not the way I look at it. Also, India has to diversify its sourcing of military equipment. Already happened. You used to buy 70% from Russia. I think now it's down to 35 or something. And then that has to be a calculation that New Delhi has to do. On the EU, President von der Leyen strongly underlined the importance of a trade deal with India. EU is 600 million people.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's the largest market in the world. So then India will need to also think through, is it then worth to make some compromises to make that trade deal happen? And the same, the EU needs to then think through, and EU needs to also approve it. Of course, there are also mavericks among the EU countries. We'll see that also with the Mercosur deal that von der Leyen developed.
Absolutely.
Of course, it will be in the interest of EU to get the Mercosur deal with
It's the age of mavericks, except for the Scandinavians.
They're very benign.
Who remain very
We are just days away, Rajdeep. As Mr. Brende knows, we are just days away from operationalizing the India-EFTA agreement, and it's a unique one in the sense that there is a promise to enable investment into the Indian market, hard money. But I want to come back.
I need to tell you a story about EFTA, because many of your viewers maybe have never heard about EFTA. But it's this small trade organization for free trade agreements. And it is together the 10th largest economy in the world.
Yes.
But it's the only international organization where Norway, my home country, is a superpower.
Absolutely.
Because it's Norway, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and Iceland. But I think this can be an icebreaker also for the EU deal. Well, the deal you made with EFTA could be a possible kind of blueprint also with the EU deal. If you can agree with Switzerland and Norway on agriculture, you can deal also with the French farmers and the producers of cheese.
Siddharth, before you go for the next question, just on a lighter note, the other superpower that Norway, by the way, his home country is building is football. The biggest star in the EPL is a Norwegian.
Yeah, Mr. Holland.
Mr. Holland, very good. He's the second most popular Norwegian after Mr. Brende, but go ahead.
Unfortunately, that latter part was fake news. Unfortunately. But I do, we had this fortune list of the richest Norwegians the other day.
Yes.
And I think he ended up, Mr. Holland, on that list. He's now worth, I think, like $500 million US. Wow. Good for him. He's amazing. He's a true Viking.
Go ahead, I want to come back to the point about trade wars. Huge amount of uncertainty, and pretty much all major economies in the world don't know how to really get out of this phase. Your own reading of the situation, Mr. Brende, by when do you think President Trump is going to be satisfied and say that, okay, the trade resetting part of his agenda is over?
In 3.5 years.
Okay, then one more quick follow-up, and this is to do with India. In all of this uncertainty, and you've been watching India and you meet with policymakers, ministers, industry representatives, what should India be doing beyond the immediate conversations that we are having on trade with various countries in order to firm up our position as a significant global economic, military, and strategic power?
I think we've touched on some of it already, but over time, there is correlation between a country's economic strength and also its influence. That's where it all starts. Look at the Soviet Union, that was forever until it was no more. Why did the Soviet Union collapse? It was because of they failed economically. They were not doing so badly in 60s and 70s. They were a real competitor. They had their big industries and all that. But then it just didn't work anymore. It didn't produce welfare. And that's why America is still so strong, because they're economically very powerful. When you listen to the Americans, you can feel sometimes that they have been a victim in this global order. But how can you be a victim if you're 30% of the global economy and 5% of the global population? You know, that's not a victim, that's a winner.
But because linked to that is what, when Siddharth and I had interviewed you several months ago, was you mentioned ease of doing business. You mentioned inequalities that still exist in that interview. You also mentioned health and education. I mean, you just mentioned in this interview the number of engineers that China is producing, the quality universities that China has. In the world top 100 universities, there are several Chinese universities. We don't have a single university in this country. I mean, is India's next step actually to produce far better universities, far better hospitals, so you improve your health indicators, but more importantly, just ensure inequalities reduce by improving the ease of doing business? That hasn't happened to the extent that many believe it should have. Reforms are seen to be still incremental in India. They're not seen to be an article of faith. Do you agree?
So the proof is in the pudding. You cannot complain when you have 7% economic growth. You could
we should be growing at 10.
Well, I think with more reforms, you could maybe see that. But, you know, political...
But growth necessarily does not mean decrease in inequality. The disparity exists, even in that growth.
Yeah, but, you know, then my short answer would be, like, if you had then slower economic growth, inequalities would even be wider. And a prerequisite for dealing with inequalities is also growth. And I think India saw that. For many years, you had a different policy. Maybe you sliced the cake in a very meticulous way, but you know what you have to do is to bake a bigger cake or pie, and then it's also more likely that more people will benefit from that pie. Then it's up to also, of course, to the leaders to make sure that is inclusiveness in this. But you know, if you go too far in just focusing on redistribution of wealth and not baking a bigger pie, you can also stay poor, but you can be equally poor. I would though say, and this is you were referring to last time we spoke, I think still though, if I may, that India should invest more in education. I think the reason why, for example, the Nordic countries are doing well, we're also doing well on the Gini coefficient that is very low. We have good growth, but we also have equal opportunities. I think for India, it's good to have great universities, but the talent you have, you will need to have schools for every child that is of a certain standard.
Yes.
And, you know, in my country, Norway, 98% of the kids go to public schools, and they're good. They're not maybe as amazing as you get if you pay $200,000 for a school, but you know, you also have to be cost effective. And here I think that this is possible. Also with the new technologies now, you can say that if a teacher is not good at teaching algebra, you have 10 minutes of the best teacher in the world up there showing a video how you then do algebra, and then the teacher can be available. Maybe he can or she can correct some of this.
You think AI will be a better teacher than a human teacher in the future?
I think there is the combination. Of course, you need humans there. You know, the kids also need someone overlooking it. But my main point is that if you go into a classroom today in India, it looks almost the same as they did 50 years ago. If you go into a hospital today, you cannot recognize it. It's all technology and all this all over the place. So for India, when you grow richer, I would start investing in education and research. Then I think the hospitals and all that will come later on, because you will also then grow a bigger pie.
Your
Børge,
current
I know you're
conversation,
we're completely running out of time, but I have to ask you this because a lot of focus on Trump. There is a huge anxiety that I see when President Trump speaks of de-dollarization. Every time he sees countries coming together, currency swaps happening, he thinks the world is de-dollarizing and he'll punish those countries like he did India. And he spoke to India about not daring to go ahead with BRICS. Do you see a future where de-dollarization, a dollar as a currency is not, or dollar is not the main currency? Is that even in the realm of the near future?
Not so likely, I think. But of course, you cannot totally exclude a development where we're relying less on the dollar. But capital is like water, you know, it flows where the person that owns the currency feels that is most protected. And you don't want it locked in. You don't want the country then to say, in a day, you will then make it harder to move the currency out of that country or whatever. Sorry. And the dollar is still very competitive. But Mr. Trump is also very open for crypto. He's changed a lot of laws now and to open up for more crypto. So maybe cryptocurrency, I think, is, to be very frank, I think is a bigger challenge for the dollar than a potential BRIC currency, because I haven't seen that BRIC currency, and I don't think there is enough interest between the countries.
Gaurav, you have a final question?
you know, your current conversations right now in India, what is that conversation like, and especially more access for Indian goods in the world market?
So I think that India has okay market access, but it could be better. But then, of course, India, to get better market access, you also have to then assess, are there things in India with tariffs or market access to India that you would like to adjust to get better access in other countries? Because you have to have something to bargain with. And there, India has a lot to bargain with, because you have relatively high tariffs. The challenge when I was trade minister in Norway is that, like, we abolished all the industry tariffs almost 25 years ago. So when I was bargaining with other countries, I said, no, but we don't need to lower with you because you have nothing to offer, because you will already have full access to your market. You know, but I still don't think that it was a good thing for Norway that we lowered the industry tariffs.
Do you see an end game to the Russia-Ukraine war? A time frame that this is the time that peace could be achieved, this is the road that could be followed? Or that war becomes indefinite?
No, every war needs to end. And this war will also end. I think it's more a question, will it end in half a year, 2 years, or 3 years? I don't think in 3 years' time, I don't think there will be a war in Ukraine.
Okay, we're reaching the end. You know, we haven't discussed, Mr. Brende, the Narendra Modi. Just turned 75. What's his biggest strength and biggest weakness?
I think the strength of the Indian economy, that's a snowball effect. Part of your population live in the Himalayas, so they're used to snow, not so much other places.
Yeah.
But you know, the snowball is very small, and then it starts to roll, and it can become very big, and can like really. So there is a snowball effect, and I think Modi, at least at the beginning, was also introducing a lot of economic reforms that he is now seeing the yield of, and lately after the U.S. thing, maybe that was a blessing in disguise too. There are new reforms, since I think that will be fixed. I think also that there is a lot of goodwill towards India globally. if you look at countries people like India and Indians. And I think it's important to stay that way too. It's always nice to be liked, but
You're not mentioning the weakness.
no, that's not my job.
Interesting. Okay. World Economic Forum, January 2026. What's the headline? What's going to be the theme this time?
It's global dialogue, moving the world forward.
Okay. As always, Mr. Brende, what you're showing us is the glass half full, and that perhaps is what the World Economic Forum is attempting to showcase in January to see how this dialogue can take the world forward. We've had a wonderful, riveting conversation on a variety of issues. Thank you very much for your patience. And as I said, you and Erik Haaland are competing for who's the Norwegian having the maximum influence on the world.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And you're wearing a Manchester City colored tie as well.
Yeah, that's on purpose. Yeah. I love that color.
Thank you very much for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
In association with
Century Ply Club Prime. Raho befikar. Moto G96 5G. All eyes on you.
विराज रायचन रायचन स्टील
स्टील आपने वरदान स्टील का नाम सुना होगा
ऑफ कोर्स आप मिस्टर वरदान के बेटे हैं
नहीं
छोटे भाई
नहीं नहीं
दामाद
नहीं
फिर
शेयर होल्डर
शेयर होल्डर
सही टाइम पे उनके शेयर्स खरीदे तभी आज मैं यहाँ हूँ
जो आगे की सोचते हैं ग्रो करते हैं